Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining today's session. We're just going to give people a minute or two to get on, and then we'll get going. So just bear with us for a minute or two while a few more people get on the webinar.
I'm hearing a lot of background stuff.
Yeah, I am too of it. There we go.
That's fine.
Sorry, I keep putting it on mute and then saying something. So it was me.
Yeah, it's you. So we'll remind you to unmute when you're ready to go. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Looking forward to this session. We're just going to give folks another minute to get on, and we'll go from there. All right, great. So thanks, everybody, for joining today's session with Frank Sentner entitled Insurance Data AI and an Insurance Data Bill of Rights. Just a couple of housekeeping points about the session before we jump into it. The chat is going to be open throughout the session, so I encourage you to introduce yourself, enter any questions during the session. It will be recorded, and we will have time for dedicated Q&A at the end. But you can, as I said, certainly feel free to drop questions in the chat throughout, and we will we'll try to get those, in the flow of the conversation. But then also, if we miss any, we'll have time at the end for those. So pleased today to be here with Frank Sentner. As many of you know, he is a creator of Sagita, which is now part of Vertafore, the first Accord AL3-based agency management system and still in use by many of the largest brokers globally. Frank has nearly 50 years working in insurance technology, currently advises several Insurtech startups as well as Accord, and he has been a longstanding advocate for agency and agency data rights, and one of the industry's original voices on data ownership. So today's conversation isn't going to be about pitting agents against vendors. It's about who captures the value of insurance data as AI scales and whether the current system is fair. Frank's going to lay out both the problem and a proposed framework for solving it. Before we jump into it, I'm going to turn it over to my ITA co-founder, Bob Sargent, to just tell you a little bit more about the Insurtech Association and some of the exciting new things that we have coming out right now in 2026.
Thanks, Josh. Of course, my phone rang just as I was going off mute, of course. Thank you for joining us this morning. Provide a little bit of background on ITA. ITA is a nonprofit association, which you probably know, focused on innovation in insurance. It's open to anyone focusing on supporting Insurtech innovators. ITA provides a range of benefits, including networking in person and virtually, not only connecting with other insurance innovators, but also with other constituencies like capital providers, vendors, investors, and industry leaders like Frank. We also offer educational opportunities and various specific initiatives, such as our initiative focusing on the regulation of AI in insurance. We have a wide range of members. We're particularly valuable to founders of Insurtech companies at any stage. We're also open to anyone with an interest in Insurtech, including agent brokers and insurers. We also have members that are vendors, consultants, community groups, etc. Sponsorship has been critical to ITA's progress to date. These are our current sponsors, including our founding sponsors. We want to thank our sponsors for directly supporting our range of activities. This group has made our startup and initial couple of years possible, and we're always looking for additional sponsors. There are a range of benefits to being a sponsor beyond supporting Insurtech, including visibility, access, and hosting opportunities. We would appreciate your consideration of sponsorships. Please let us know how we can better support innovation in insurance. For those of you who have not joined ITA yet, we hope you join right after this webinar. And thank you to those attending who are already members. Thank you. Thank you, Josh and Frank, and I'll turn it back to Josh.
All right, thanks, Bob, and thanks again. We have a nice group joining today, so thanks for everyone who's on. So, Frank, everyone's talking about AI, and maybe there's a distinction between AI and data, but as a starting point, maybe let's just start with the data supply chain. And when an agent enters a client's information into their AMS, who really typically ends up with access to that data and under what terms?
That's a really good question. And one of the factors that I'd like to surface in this discussion is the fact that we don't have any real guidelines around the submission of data and the significance of that act on the part of an insured, a policyholder, whether it's a person or an organization. Previously I would have said the way that data got entered into the system is an insured would provide the producer with a copy of their policy, or fill out an application, respond to queries from a live agent, either by phone or in person, to fill out an application. But I will tell you, part of the increasing concern that I have is that I had 5 demos, one from my newest equity startup, which is Quandary, and 4 other unsolicited demos. People, contacted me because of the announcement of my relationship with Quandary, 4 other companies who were accomplishing quite similar use cases for independent agents. And whereas previously you would have had the person, themselves, filling out an application or giving a policy to the producer, and him having his customer service representatives or assistants put that information into their system or into a quoting engine or into a carrier's website. Today, all 5 of these companies are taking policies, using generative AI to deconstruct them into their, identifiable data elements, taking those data elements and pushing them into a comparative quoting engine, allowing the producer or the CSR to select the carriers they wanted to propose to the customer, taking those quotes, putting them into, using generative AI, a proposal, taking that proposal and attaching it to an email, which is also generated by AI, sending the proposal by email along with a link for an appointment with the producer. All of this done without any, quote, data entry on the part of the human beings involved. 6 months ago, I didn't really know what agentic AI was. I'd heard the word. Today, I'm seeing companies whose major premise for being is that they will take and do the work, literally do the work that previously was done by a producer or a CSR. And none of this exists without data.
And so in terms of the, implications for who collects it, who stores it, who controls access, the old way versus this new way, what are you seeing there?
A lot of crickets, not much discussion. I actually, one of the companies that demoed for me told me that in the life insurance space, they have AI carrying on an interview with a customer and taking an order for a life insurance policy. When I offered the opinion that this was illegal, he said, well, I mean, is it? I said, well, as I read the law, you need a licensed insurance producer in order to, sell any kind of insurance. So we're everything is up in the air right now. And we unfortunately as an industry haven't done the basic, blocking and tackling to make sure that we understand how this data should be handled. The implicit understanding that an insured has when they provide data, and data, I count policies. You got a policy, it's data. You got a video, it's data. You got audio, it's all data, everything. Previously, they thought they were providing it to an agent, and the agent was taking that data and using systems to quote them and then ultimately write through an insurance carrier policies for them for coverage and service them. That was implicit, okay? Today, I think we need to begin to make that which was implicit previously explicit, because I know, and most people in the industry know, that data is being entered into systems and being expropriated, for want of a better word, by the software as a service vendors and other third parties for purposes for which the insured has no knowledge at all. And that data is being monetized, in some cases sold back to the independent agents or even to the customers, unbeknownst to them, without any explicit permission to do so.
So I want to get back to that point, but you also made a point about, the licensing piece. Are you, is it your point of view that it should remain indefinitely a human being who is the licensed agent, or do you think as this technology evolves that there can be a model where either the entity is somehow licensed in a way, or it's still licensed as an agent or a broker, and that person accepts responsibility for the entity? It's just the language around licensing, if that approach is taken, needs to change to make that responsibility or liability more explicit or framed in a different way. Or I'd just be curious to kind of get your take on that piece, and if you have any thoughts on the way regulators are approaching it thus far.
Well, I want to be clear. I don't live in fear of Skynet. Okay. I think that I am amazed and thrilled by what the technology is capable of doing. I think agentic AI is going to make it much easier for insurance agents and brokers in particular to do the work they need to do and spend more time on a consultative basis with their customers and have many more customers than they could afford to have today, because a lot of this busy work is taken care of. I simply want us to be explicit about what it is that we're giving permission for. And in the write-up for this, the word ownership is used on a number of occasions. I try to avoid the word ownership, because you can't own data in the way that you own a car or a house, right? But but I do believe we need to be explicit about the rights that are being accorded to different participants in the ecosystem, right? So if the data is about me or about my company, it's my data. It belongs to me. Ownership aside, I should have unlimited, unfettered access to it at any point in time, including, I want you to delete all my data. All my data, all reference to my data from your systems. I'm not doing business with you anymore. Okay? Now, in order to do that, we have to have a stated purpose for which the data is being provided. And we have to have an opt-in environment, right? Not an opt-out. Right now we have opt-out. If you forget to check off the little box, okay, that says, you're opting out, you've agreed to terms and conditions that you haven't probably read. For instance, insurance agents and brokers, have rights to the data for me as a personal lines insured or as the president of my company and about my company for the purpose of writing insurance policies, quoting them, writing them, and servicing them, right? That needs to be explicit. You do not have the right to provide access to and utilization of my data without explicitly getting my opt-in, because your rights are secondary to mine, okay? The same with the insurance carriers. Where I say agents, you can say carriers, MGAs. Anybody in the ecosystem other than the insured only has the rights to that data that are accorded to them by the explicit understanding of the insured. Now, I know where you're getting here is the agency management system vendors, as an example, and I believe this applies equally in some cases to policy administration systems and many of the third-party software providers, that are collecting data about us today, including our houses and our cars. And with the Internet of Things, our data is being gathered everywhere.
Yep.
And we're not being explicit about how it can be used. But insurance entities have a responsibility for care, custody, and control. And of our data, because that's the only thing that they really have, right? They don't actually have us physically. Unfortunately, the vendors that are providing software services to them, software as a service and others, including AI providers, are taking that data, and the agents and brokers are signing agreements that in many cases they haven't read clearly, that give rights to that data to those entities. Now, typically it's stipulated that it's, for, in only circumstances where it's aggregated and anonymized or de-identified.
Yeah.
Not always. And, we also are being presented as insureds with direct to consumer options on our phones, right? And when you download the app and they say, click here to agree to our terms and conditions, or you can click the little link over here and read the 400-page document. Okay?
Right.
No, nobody's doing that, right?
Right.
And we're giving, in some cases, our user credentials to our insurance carrier websites where our policies are, and we're giving the rights to our data to these vendors in perpetuity. And, we have no ability to claw back that data. We have no ability to end the relationship. And we're agreeing to a blanket utilization of our data, the purposes for which we do not know.
And I suppose in our own way, we could each now load those documents into our own favorite generative AI tool and ask it to analyze it and tell us where we're exposing ourselves. Right? I guess have you seen anyone sort of take leadership on this and offer people this opt-in capability? Or, I mean, realistically, do you even have an option to shop this around, or is this the way it works with everyone?
It's pretty much the way it works with everyone. There are less offensive utilizations and more offensive and aggressive utilizations. And as I said before, with our houses and our cars and everything that we interact with now gathering data about us, it's become more pervasive. I read an article recently that was posted actually on LinkedIn about I think it's actually a lawsuit at this point in time, but it's definitely a circumstance where a driver wanted to defend themselves and they had a connected car and they requested a copy of their data from the manufacturer, and the manufacturer said no. And they said, but it's my data. Well, when you signed up for, and it's not when you buy the car, by the way, it's when you do the first connected service. Yeah. When you choose the first connected service, you agree, as we do on our phones, to their terms and conditions. And in that, you give them complete control of all the data in the car. Now, their argument is we need that to perfect our ADAS systems and to train our, driverless, vehicles and so forth. But I want to defend myself in a court of law, and you're holding my data, and you refuse to give me my data, which could exonerate me because you want to use it to defend yourself in the event of a liability suit. Right. And this hiding the facts of the terms and conditions under which our data is being provided, not making explicit the purpose for which this data is the sole and express purpose for which we are agreeing to provide our data, is a huge mistake. And AI is only, shining a giant spotlight on this problem, because it, I promise you, is going to get far worse.
And besides ticking the box and explicitly handing over rights to our data, are there other ways that, folks in the ecosystem are, restricting our access to our data or taking advantage of our data, beyond those explicit handoffs?
Yes. A lot of, software as a service vendors, they build their business model on retaining customers, okay? Oftentimes with draconian contracts that, go out for years, multiple years, during which period of time, if you want to get off their platform, you have to pay them all the potential earnings that they would have had under that contract for the full term of the contract. And they charge you a lot of money for your data. And in many cases, it's poor technology, not providing good tools for people to access the data. So if I provide my data to a software as a service vendor, I should have the access to that data on an economically favorable basis, not free necessarily, but certainly not unreasonably priced. And I should have the tools to get that data back. That's part of the deal. And that's not the case today.
Yeah. So we have a few comments and questions from folks in the audience. So one, I guess, technical question on your driver example. Would the driver have to get the court to subpoena the data for their accident case, and is that even an option?
I believe it is an option, but as we've discovered, court cases can take a very long time. And many people don't have the wherewithal to do that. And these companies can, appeal and appeal and appeal, ad nauseum. The most important thing is that we start as an industry stepping up, because individual insureds are not going to be able to undertake this effort themselves. What's happening is we've got an erosion of trust, where previously the independent agent and the insurers by extension were trusted partners that we went to try to get protection for the risks in our lives. Everybody is so suspect. And if the industry does not get out ahead of this problem, we're going to have people refusing to provide their data. Now, we can turn around and refuse to provide an insurance policy for them, but that's certainly not going to help the situation. And so the process begins with regulation. And if we do a good job this is a highly regulated industry, right? We're not afraid of regulations. We're just applying them to the wrong end of the process, right? Instead of arguing over whether the agent owns the expiration or the carrier owns the expiration, we ought to be talking about how do we make our customers comfortable giving us very important private information about them and ensure that they're going to treat us as a trusted partner. It's incumbent upon the professionals in the insurance industry to take the first step on this. If we do a good job in regulation, legislation is probably less likely. And, we probably don't want legislation on a federal basis because insurance is regulated on a state basis. If we have to go through the individual state legislatures throughout the country, it's going to take forever, and it's going to be very unequal in different parts of the country. We don't have a GDPR as Europe does, but we need something like that desperately, more generally. But I think within the insurance industry, we have a very active and successful National Association of Insurance Commissioners, the NAIC, and they write model laws for their members, the states where individual commissioners are elected or appointed. And those laws, those model laws are often adopted, within the majority of states. Now, there's going to be some differences, but regulators, can't be worried about the font size on a form that gives a warning to the customer, right? Because the customer's not even seeing the form anymore, okay? Yeah. It's all being done behind the scenes by magic. Yeah. And the regulators need to get on board with the fact that they know they want to protect the insureds. The single biggest threat to those insureds is to their data right now. When you're talking about insurance is nothing but data and, money, of course, right. But that has to be a priority. And I do believe there are some people who are working on this problem.
Yeah. So, Sagitta is part of Vertafore. Vertafore has, had a couple of turns with private equity at huge valuations.
Yeah.
And so I know you've kind of made the argument that most of that valuation is the data. But I do have a question. Like, again, I'm trying to draw the distinction between, data and then AI plus data. So, is there a difference in data protection for, that scenario or a carrier versus now you're getting into, some of the horizontal LLMs and using data for training in whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever, models being used. Is there a distinction, or is it just sort of like, putting more gasoline on the fire because there's just such a larger volume of data that can be used and analyzed and manipulated so much more easily than it could in the past?
Well, today there's no distinction, okay? What I'm positing is a world in which, beginning from the first contact with the insured, and that would normally in the American agency system be by an independent agent or broker, right? Starting from that point, there is a statement of purpose, okay? We're asking you for this data, okay, for this purpose, clearly and distinctly to quote, write, and service insurance protection for you and your assets, okay? And you are agreeing to give us your data for that express purpose. If I want to use your data for other purposes, right? I want to be able to have a database of, underwriting details, that help me put together rates and rules and so forth. that would have to be something that would be explicitly requested of the originator of the data, of the policyholders themselves, okay? And if you make it such that every usage has to be discreetly identified and agreed to affirmatively, opt in, then that has a ripple effect. Then agents and brokers can say, I'm sorry, Vertifor or Applied Systems or anybody else, your contract, that contract that you gave me, that I signed and maybe read, it's null and void, okay? Because I don't have the freedom to give you the secondary usage that you requested, okay? And then those entities have to go to the LexisNexis, Verisk, ISO. You follow me? This ripples out starting from the policyholder. And if we're very, very clear about every usage for the policyholder's data has to be discreetly identified by the people collecting that data, and they have to be just specifically given permission, then that has that ripple effect. It furthermore should include the right to claw back my data, okay? When I am no longer doing business with you, I can stipulate that you must delete my data. And that would then ripple through the system of the insurance industry. The only way that I can think we can do this is by starting with the policyholder, and obviously it's the agents and brokers who are on the front line, and to the extent that there are carriers, direct writers, and captive agents, they all must be held to account by the regulators for giving express permission for use and opt-in requirements.
And what's your feeling about like some of the data processing agreements that are out there? I mean, are they a step toward this, or is that still more of a European concept or UK concept than taking hold here in the US?
I mean, as far as I know, there is no one who is offering this level of, well, I shouldn't say that. I do know of one startup, well, they're pretty long in the tooth for a startup, but they use customer login credentials, okay, to get data from insurance carrier systems. And they're very explicit with the customers, insureds, who give them those credentials, the purposes for which they can use that data. And it is opt-in, okay? But that's one amongst, and I'm obviously not aware of everybody, so there may be a lot of really good actors out there who are being very responsible. But the vast majority of us are in the hands of people who haven't been paying attention to this. It hasn't been something that got raised to the level of awareness that the AI spotlight is now bringing to this subject.
And is there any differentiation in terms of, some organizations are still using Excel, there's tools to generate PDFs, and now, some of the PDFs are forms that can be filled out and things like that? Or is it just, another tool in the, larger toolbox that companies are using and the same issues apply?
Yeah, I'm perfectly comfortable with the application of technologies, as they arise and become adopted and pervasive. Always have been. What I want is people to be explicit and conscious, both us as policyholders and the folks that we're dealing with directly, about what those responsibilities are. I should be responsible to demand accountability on the part of the people that I'm working with, and to be thoughtful in terms of what I agree to. And the partners on the other side of that need to be responsible for honoring those expectations, explicit expectations, and conducting themselves accordingly. There's enormous amounts of money being made on using quote, publicly available data. Well, it's only publicly available data because it's private data to somebody, but it's only publicly available data because we haven't been careful about making sure that it stayed private. We have to be able to share data with our trusted advisors. I mean, had an insurance agent, the other day tell me that he was contacted by an insured that he had policies with, and he said, I think I need to get cyber insurance. And the guy said, great idea. I need your financials. He said, no, I'm not comfortable giving you my financials. And he said, I can't get you a policy, if I don't have your financials. What I said to him is, you should probably just go to ChatGPT and ask for the guy's financials because they're probably there. I mean, I did this with Accord weeks ago, months ago, when we were trying to do a project and the lawyers were concerned about the intellectual property of Accord. And while we were on the call discussing that, I asked ChatGPT for a complete breakdown of one of the Accord lines of business. Yeah. And it did everything. Yeah. I held it up to the screen and said, hey guys, too late.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've mentioned a few different things, but if you were sort of have a one-page data bill of rights, what are the 3 or 4 non-negotiable components of that you would put in there?
Well, first of all, you start with the policyholder, okay, or prospective policyholder. Secondly, you have to identify explicitly the purpose for which the data that they're providing you is to be used. Explicit. It has to be opt-in. And it has to include the right to have your data deleted once you are no longer doing business with the organization or plan to no longer doing business with the organization. And that has to be absolutely binding such that it adheres to the benefit of the first recipient, agent or broker, the second recipient, a quoting engine, the third recipient, the insurance company, the fourth recipient, Verisk, on down the chain. It has to be. That I cannot conceive of another way to put this genie back in the bottle. And it's not going to do anything for those of us who have our data out there already, okay? Yeah. Because we can't go back and say, oh, could you give me a contract so I can get my data back? That's not going to happen. But when I renew my policy, I will have an express purpose for which the data is being provided. I will opt in and I will refuse permission for any other subsequent reuse of that data.
And realistically, if we get to that world, where does the responsibility fall if I want to opt out? How would the insured even know if the service providers have removed it from their systems, and then all the way down that chain you described?
Yeah. Enforcement is, of course, where the rub comes in, ultimately recourse to the legal system. Now, that's not necessarily the case. In other words, if you had reason to suspect that there were bad actors who were not following the rules, you could petition the regulators in a state, assuming that they're, it's an organization regulated by them, and they could conduct an audit to verify. Now, they're not going to do that for one insured, but if there's a pattern of abuse, you can use regulation and auditing and inspection. When it begins to ripple further up the chain, you'd have to go probably to the federal government, and it would have to be the Department of Commerce, I would imagine, where you would again require an inspection, or an audit, because there are obvious signs that someone's using data. they claim the ability to tell you demographically, price sensitivity or, market, trends or any number of things that could only be known by having access to the data. And there may need to be exceptions, for those circumstances where people do obviously opt in and say, yeah, you want to train your LLM on this? Yeah, I agree to that, right? But if we start with a pretty simple, straightforward approach, not that there's anything simple about any of this, but if we start with the principles that I've outlined, then we can at least begin to address the problem.
So Supriyo made an interesting comment in the chat regarding, similar problem with healthcare data.
Sure.
And there's HIPAA regulations and concept of meaningful consent of patients and their data. I mean, do you see it similar? Have you looked at that as a,
yes,
sort of a path for how this could be done?
Yeah, we've done it for healthcare, private data with HIPAA. It's mostly about them not sharing the data with a third party and us opting in. Okay. Unfortunately, it's not very granular. In other words, in my experience, the purposes for which the data is being collected is not explicitly stated. Okay, in a limiting fashion. And therefore, it's sort of a blanket opt-in, and then it goes wherever it goes. Now, what we don't want to do is create a world in which it is as difficult for my specialist who's in a different network to get my my primary care doctor's, diagnoses because and the radiology firm that's in another network that they don't share it, but they're starting to solve that problem. We already have very dynamic data sharing throughout the property and casualty insurance industry. Okay, it is virtually unrestricted apart from the economic restrictions that vendors choose to put on it and the technical ineptitude of some of them in making it available, but there's a lot of data flowing throughout our ecosystem.
Yeah,
it's virtually unregulated from what I can see.
Yeah, and then I guess one of the other questions I have, and you alluded to this before, but what are your thoughts specifically about sort of the data aggregators like Verisk, LexisNexis, the data marketplaces that are being created to, either sell data or create analytics products built on this aggregated data? What are your thoughts on that and kind of the benefits and the exposures around that?
Yeah, I mean, organizations like LexisNexis and Verisk would not run upwards of 50% profit margins if they had a cost of goods sold. Okay, you want to be in the data business, then you should be paying for the data that you're collecting, and not just paying one level down, but it needs to come all the way back to me, personally. So there's a whole industry built on collecting our data, and as long as it's stayed within the beltway, so to speak, most people, not me, but most people have been perfectly happy to leave it alone. But it's now getting out there, and if you think that in the hands of Verisk or LexisNexis you can build a big company, very, very profitable with everybody's data, imagine what you could do with an AI powered platform. And I'm sure they're adding AI quickly as we speak to their platforms. So
sure. And what are your thoughts about if this sort of Bill of Rights is implemented, or just a strong data rights framework in general is implemented? What are your thoughts around the impact on innovation in the industry?
innovation is not suffering at this point. you know, and I'm not suggesting that they don't, use agentic AI to deconstruct policies, and push them through to quoting, to proposals, to emails, to, a carrier website for issuance. We got straight through processing, finally. I don't want to derail that. I just want the agent to understand that when they're doing that, they've got an agreement with the customer about the purposes for which that data can be used. And the customer has opted in, okay? And it needs to be done explicitly.
So I just want to ask a couple of questions, and then we'll open it, up to questions from everybody. So please, if you haven't already, put your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them before we finish up today. But and I want to mention one other thing, which is some of you may have attended our ITA webinar specifically around regulation and AI regulation. We have a relationship with the American Insurtech Council, which has been commenting on different legislation and NAIC, concepts that are out there, et cetera. And so I just, encourage you to keep an eye out for that, because the industry is looking for feedback from startups on the impact of this regulation on them. And so we want to make sure that, as these policies are put in place, that they make it possible for startups to still do business and to innovate. But with that in mind, if you were advising a founder who, was starting, and before they ever wrote a line of code, how would you tell them to approach data rights and contracts before they ever started?
Well, I think the first thing they can do is to include, when, where you normally would say it's an app and you're downloading the app, okay? Where it says click here to agree to our terms and conditions? You put a statement of purpose, okay? Your data is being collected for this purpose and this purpose only. Do you agree? Okay. And it needs to be on the first screen, very concise, very clear. If they say yes, then you could say to them, to train blah, 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 or whatever else, we have, would you be willing to have your data used for additional purposes? Okay. Click yes, okay? Do you want the ability to claw back your data in the event that you no longer use this application? Okay, so that's very broad, all right? Now you can choose to do number one only, okay? You could choose to do a number of number twos, explicitly naming the subsequent uses that you want to get permission for, and you could choose to leave off the last one, but it needs to state affirmatively what you are collecting this data for. And it's no more difficult. Certainly all startups, they may be using law.com, but all of them have these EULAs, end user license agreements, right? And they vary widely. Okay, I have a startup that's got a mobile app that I read their EULA, and the insurance agent app EULA says clearly, we will never sell your data for any purpose to anyone else. We collect it solely for the purpose of optimizing the system that we're giving you to manage your data. Real clear, real short, clear English, okay? There is no reason that you can't do that. If you're burying, gotchas 19 paragraphs deep into the document, there's a reason you're doing that, okay?
Right.
You are counting on the fact that the person will not get that far because your language is so obtuse and so, impenetrable, and they just give up if they even open it to begin with. So, and I've compared similar, products side by side. You can do this if you want to do it, okay? It's like my favorite light bulb joke, How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one. But the light bulb really has to want to change. We have to want to change. It's easily, not easily, it's easily the most important thing we have to do, and a challenging one, but it can be done.
So last question. So carrot versus the stick, do you think this, like, data ethics can become a competitive advantage for startups and other companies, or is it realistically going to be more of just, compliance checkbook and something that's going to have to be pushed down, from the top?
I can't tell you how gratified I was to see that Anthropic is telling the federal government, the military, we're not going to allow you to use our platform to create completely autonomous weapons. Okay? If you've got any concerns about Skynet, that's the threshold right there. Okay? Yeah. And, they are refusing to allow them to use it to do facial recognition on average Joes out in the street. And they've got a $200 million contract with the government on the line for this, okay? Though we need more companies like that, okay? I promise you, there are AI developers all over the world who are switching to Anthropic as we speak.
Yeah. Okay, and just checking if anyone has any questions that we haven't answered or any comments they'd like to add to the discussion, now's the time. So please add those in. Just looking to see.
There's a lot of stuff in there. I can't.
I have a question here, actually, that an angle we haven't talked about, Frank.
Yeah.
And what do you think about the investor perspective on this? And, that they might argue that, aggregated data is a feature and not a bug, and the network effects of that aggregated data, et cetera.
I'm perfectly fine with you aggregating data and de-identifying data. I just want you to be really explicitly clear that's what you're doing. And I don't want it buried in paragraph 19 of a 40-page, contract. That's all. And does it mean that we have to run the risk that some people are going to say no? Sure, absolutely. And you have to honor that decision. Yeah. Will it slow things down a little bit? Arguably, AI could have really done with some slowing down in the last few months, because they've just about burned through the credibility and patience of the American public. And, the stock market is starting to vote in the opposite direction. There's a limit to what people will put up with.
Yeah. Agreed. All right, last call for questions before we finish up today. All right, we have a thank you, outstanding discussion. Thank you, Frank, but we do have a couple of questions here. Isn't aggregation and de-identifying assumed at this point? Also, isn't opting in and out another profile that we can now use as data as a signal? That's a next level analysis there.
Well, pretty much anything is a potential data point. But when you say it's a given within the industry, okay? I don't think the vast majority of people have understood until very recently. They're playing around with ChatGPT and discovering what it is that ChatGPT knows about them, right? Or Googling themselves, right? I don't think most people understand the uses to which this information can be put, and or even that it's being collected and maintained at a level that could have a real impact on their lives. Except when you say, I'd like the data from my connected car, to fight a lawsuit, and suddenly you can't get it because of something you never even read when you signed up for Sirius XM, in your connected car, right? So, I think people are becoming more aware of it. I do believe that AI, as I said, is shining a big giant spotlight on it. And I think it now is the time.
Another question here. What risks does a company using AI coded applications run when the AI agents make code, I guess generate code that treats personal data in a way that the company didn't intend?
The company's liable. You can't say the AI made me do it, okay? That doesn't wash. And it's probably worth noting that as excited as I am about agentic AI, when I work with the startups, most of them are using some aspect of that. I'm always clear, okay? I know your AI can make decisions, okay? Don't, okay? There are logical points at which human beings should be making the decisions. Decisions for people who are given the facts are not that difficult to make, okay? And it's much more difficult to undo a decision made by an AI that the human didn't review and approve first. So let them do all the grunt work in the world. Mazel tov, just do not let them, make decisions. That's where I draw the line.
All right, great. Well, Frank, thanks so much for your thought leadership on this and taking the time to discuss it and answer these questions. Probably wrap up here unless the last question pops up. Let's see. Someone's asking what Insurtech Association is doing about this. So,
Good.
As I mentioned, good question. We do have sessions we've been running both publicly, where folks from AITC and others have been, feeding back kind of what's happening on the legislative and regulatory front. And then we've had kind of private working groups where people can provide their feedback and comments on policy language and legislative language that's being produced. But, we're happy to add other sessions and maybe raise this issue. And Frank, maybe if, you have some time to share and participate in those discussions, we could get some of your thought leadership into that as well.
Sure, I can start a podcast, rantings of an angry old man.
What is that? Yelling at clouds with Frank Sentner?
Yeah.
Well, this is a little bit outside the box, but Frank, if you got another minute to answer, what is your biggest aha, or what are your biggest aha and oh no moments with AI in your experience?
I would say, I mentioned earlier that I didn't really even know anything about agentic AI 6 months ago. The last month and a half has been absolutely eye-opening. I knew it was theoretically impossible. I've been reading science fiction since I was a little kid. And, many of the things that I've read about have come true. I'm just amazed at how fast it's happening. And it's not just that I'm an old man, it's the rate of change is honestly frightening.
Yeah.
Now I'm excited, but I'm excited and scared, right? Because I don't think we put nearly enough thought into how do we manage and regulate this? How do we ensure that, human beings remain in the mix such that we don't create massive, unemployment? There are huge policy issues, and I've been trying to avoid them and just focus on policy small p. How do we manage our policy holders' data? But, it is really astonishing to me how quickly this stuff is moving. And I love working with Drive, one of my startups, and I'm amazed at how the AI can look at the video of the driver's face and look out the windshield and sync up those two videos and know whether the driver is actually looking at the threat out the windshield. And in real time, on nothing but a mobile phone, alert you to that. I mean, that's magic.
I think Roberto's on, so hopefully he'll appreciate the hat tip there.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, I think the comments that Sam Altman made the other day about, how much is invested in raising a person and sort of comparing humans to the investment in raising an AI, I think was eye-opening for a lot of people. So
yep.
That is definitely more of a big capital P policy issue for sure these days.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's an ancient Chinese curse. May you live in interesting
times.
and we are, man, are we ever.
All right, well, maybe we'll leave it there, Frank. And just a reminder to everyone, please keep an eye out. Any day now, a new ITA website is coming. You'll see our upcoming events. We have a number of things coming up in March here, and then leading into April and into the summer as well, both online and in-person activities. And love for those of you who are not members to have you join as members. Very easy, very inexpensive. And, we're here to help support you, and both with, content and education, as well as connections with other members in the ecosystem, both within our membership and more broadly. Have a great rest of your day. And Frank, thanks again.
You're welcome. Go ITA.